Okay, good evening. I'm back. Thank you. I'm here tonight as a follow-up to the annual technology report that I presented to the Board of Education back in July. And at that time, there were a number of questions that were presented to us and a request for some clarification on some of the things. So I'm going to attempt to do much of that tonight. Just kind of as a recap, as we all know, back in July, I came forth, and the Department of Education or Information Technology recommended that we expand the iPad initiative down to the 7th grade. This recommendation was based upon a number of factors. One of the major factors was the work that we had done with the teachers at Smith Middle School the previous year in talking about where they see as the best learning environment going forward for their students, and overwhelmingly they embraced or would like to embrace a one-to-one initiative down at Smith Middle School. Additionally, we presented some of the research that we did back in 2012 when we were looking at the high school program, and through that research we note that there's a one-to-one initiative giving a student their own device to work within every class and be able to bring home and continue their learning really increases motivation, increases student engagement inside and outside of classes. Collaboration is really increased with students, which is a critical 21st century skill, and the teachers are able to better individualize and differentiate their instruction. And certainly these are important ingredients as a foundation for higher student learning. Without the engaged student, without the motivated student, it's more difficult to reach that student and have them achieve at levels they're supposed to, if not at higher levels. Some of the benefits we also talked a little bit about in moving this program down to Smith Middle School is that the team structure at Smith really facilitates a nice uniformity in training. They meet in groups quite often, at least a couple times a week, so they can work collegially and collaboratively with each other, sharing best ideas, developing curriculum and instruction that would really help facilitate this integrated into the student learning. The transition to Glastonbury High School would be much smoother, in that students would have 1 and 2 years of not only using the iPad and learning how to use the iPad, but learning how to use the iPad the way that we want them to. It's no longer a toy, it's more of a tool, an instructional tool. And they'll be learning about various apps at Smith Middle School. So when they come to that first day at the high school, there's not a lot of new learning with the iPad. They can jump right in to instruction, and therefore you would not lose a lot of instructional time at the high school in their freshman year. Certainly we saw some reduction in computers at Smith Middle School. And Smith Middle School, from my days back at Smith and working with them again, they're just a great staff. Enthusiastic, innovative, eager. They continuously try new things, and I think that they would be able to take this initiative and really bring us forward very well. So here's the chart that seemed to cause a lot of confusion. So Dr. Bookman and I spent a couple months looking at this chart.
That's not even the one that caused me a problem.
It took you a couple months. How long did it take us?
Trying.
I can tell you that you need to be in the database to see what didn't work.
And we found that there really wasn't an easy way to do this, so we blamed it.
There is an easy way to do this.
We blamed it on the instructor. So as the instructor tonight, I knew that I had to modify my instruction and make this a little bit more understanding on it. Yes, exactly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the chart the same because I understand it perfectly. And really going to try and chunk it out into smaller pieces that maybe would help you understand it a little bit better. So the first I'm going to start with is, Jim, the bottom line. We're starting with the bottom line right here. And what the bottom line shows you is, again, this is the recommendation that we move to a 3-year fair market lease starting in 7th grade, and that going forward we would be leasing all of our iPads. So what this bottom line shows you is that in each fiscal year, or actually I should say in each school year that is up there, come on in. The more the merrier.
Camera's just swinging your way, it's okay.
What this shows you is what you could expect from a line item budget request from the technology department to support the leasing of iPads. So in 2015-16, and I'll get more into the details, so if we could focus on that bottom line. So in 2015-16, as we start the leasing of the iPads, we would have to dedicate 121,810 towards that, just in that year, to leasing. And then obviously I won't go through all of them, but in 16-17 it jumps up to around 236. My eyes don't work that well, so about $236,000. So you can see that as we add more leases on there, obviously there's going to be an incremental increase as we go through each one of those years. So that would be what I would recommend to Dr. Bookman as far as here are the cost every year to implement a leased program. So let me jump now to the top row and get rid of all of the detail as much as possible. All right? So here's what I think I was trying to say in July and failed miserably. No, it's always on the instructor. It's always on the instructor.
There we go. You're always right.
If we take a look at just that very, very top row, all right, this is what I'm going to call our cohort. All right, so these are students that are entering 7th grade in the school year 2015-16, our current 6th graders. So in 2015-16, they would receive an iPad in grade 7, that red arrow pointing up. In 2000, and the cost of that, the first year cost of that would be a 3-year lease. So we would lease the iPads for 3 years. They'd stay with them for 3 years. So the rate would stay consistent for the 3 years. You can see in 2016-17, they keep the iPad, they move to 8th grade. In 2017-18, they keep the iPad, they move to 9th grade. So that would be in 17-18, that would be the end of that first 3-year term as far as the lease goes. So staying with this same cohort, all right? In 2018-19, you can see, and I changed, this would be the renewal, a new iPad in 10th grade. I've shaded it in blue to show you what that 3-year cost would be. So in 18-19, as 10th graders, they'd get a new one, keep it as 11th graders in 19-20, keep it in 2021 as 12th graders. At the end of their senior year, they would hand it back in, and that cohort would be through. So that's what we would be looking at if we were to give the iPads next year to 7th graders. It would follow, they would have an iPad in their possession for the entire 6 years, 7th through 12th grade, but we would enter into a 3-year market lease, so in 10th grade they would get a new iPad. Now, what confuses this a little bit is that we also have this year's 8th graders who do not have iPads, and we're going to also need to give them an iPad in 2015-16. So here what we've said is that it doesn't make a lot of sense to enter into a 3-year lease, so we decided we would do a 4-year lease with them. So freshmen would be entering in school year 15-16. You can see that the cost is equalized over those 4 years at approximately $64,417. So we would have 2 leases going at the same time during this year. So that's year 1. We have current 6th graders and current 8th graders. Both do not have iPads, so we would need to supply iPads to both grades. The cycle repeats itself in the following year as well. And the reason is obviously our 6th grades don't have iPads, but because we're giving 7th graders iPads, but not the 8th graders, we have those 8th graders would then be coming up into 9th grade. And we'd have to repeat that cycle for 2 years. So you can see there again the cohort about the 3rd row down. That's the 7th grade cohort. It goes all the way across for 6 years, and you can see the cost associated with that. The 9th graders, who would be the 8th graders that did not get iPads, and you could see the cost associated with that on doing a 4-year lease across the board. This is the first 2 years we would run into this problem. After that, it pretty much will equalize, because from there on, every 7th grade, every 8th grade, so we'd just be pushing it down. So you can see a little bit of how it will play out, and it gets hopefully a little bit more clear as you go forward.
Brian, the yearly costs kind of jump around a little bit. Is that because the grade number of kids are different? The unit cost is the same across, like for a lease, and the unit cost is the same for a purchase, as
Yes.
long as the 3-year lease, the unit cost is X. It just,
You
the
lock
cost
it-
is
you
because
lock
there's
in.
less
What I
students and
what
more
I tried to
students.
do here is I tried to use the 10-year enrollment projections to really try and fine-tune this as much as possible. So you're right, the variable is the change in population based upon projected enrollment going forward at these various grade levels.
Before we move on, because I know after getting through the blue and the yellow and the sevens and the nines, I kind of got this.
Okay.
But could you maybe take us back a step and just remind us, because I know we talked about it in July, the decision to lease versus to purchase, which is what we've done now, and just remind us of the cost differentials there and how we kind of got to this
Sure.
point, because I know it's been a while and.
I will, and I think that might,
Comes
I think
later?
that might
Okay.
become a little bit more
Okay,
clear,
that's
but
fine.
certainly if it doesn't, we
Okay.
can come back to that.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Okay. So, another question that was asked was to do a comparison of what would it cost be in the projected budget in 2015-16, just for that year, if we were to expand the iPad initiative to the 7th grade, assuming that we're going to enter into a 3-year lease agreement, compared to if we just took what we have out of the building and brought in new stuff, a status quo, an easy swap. So there you can see there's a lot of the details as to how we priced out the different things, including staff computers, computer labs, science lab, LCD projection systems. And I did it for both Smith Middle School and Gideon Wells School, because the next year both schools are up for replacement in our technology replacement cycle. And then if you go down to the bottom line, there's a cost comparison for 2015-16, where if we were to expand the iPad to the 7th grade, we were projecting a line item cost for both schools at about $1.09 million, compared to if we were to stay at a status quo, just swapping out what we currently have. We are projecting a budget for 2015-16 at about a $1.6 million level. So that shows just 1 year of what it is. Now, obviously, yes, Mr. Zell?
Thank you.
Yep.
Let's do a little differentiated learning here for me.
You would need an iPad to do that.
I don't need an iPad. One of the let's start with this. Let me just make sure I understand this. 9th grade, if we want to lease iPads for 4 years versus purchase them for 4 years, what's the cost differential?
There is
None.
virtually no cost differential in
So it
that.
doesn't cost us any more to lease or to,
In a 4-year
in
plan.
a 4-year plan. I understand that. Okay, I
I'm
just want to make sure that I did
The difference
understand
would be is that your budget for next year would increase by about $200,000, because we'd have to pay that up front
that. No,
as
But
opposed
see,
to.
what the problem here is
Yep.
I'm not just concerned about 15, 16. This is, to me, how we sort of get into, not into trouble, but this is, on the blue side, there are 4 more years or 3 more years of leasing that are not showing up here.
Correct,
Whereas in the other side, there's not.
correct.
So you've got multiple variables here, and this is really not an apples-to-apples comparison, because somewhere in here, we have to add in those other 3 years then. That's what I need to see. What are the, well, that wasn't,
Yeah, no, this is what I put this together. That was not, anticipating this question today, this afternoon.
that's fine. I mean, that's, honestly, that first one,
I agree with you.
Okay,
And that's,
okay.
and that's, you're right. Because that previous slide was just, okay, this is what we're going to have to put out in 1
First
year,
high
but
school
we know,
graduates.
we know going forward, if we lease these, that each subsequent year, there are going to be costs associated with this. So what this slide here shows you, again, pretty much the two same scenarios. Scenario 1 is just swapping out the computers, not even really entertaining any thoughts of iPads at Smith Middle School and Gideon Wells. So you can see that if we do this, this is pretty simple. All of the purchases are made in 15-16. There are no ongoing costs until we get back to Smith Middle School. To do that in 15-16, about a $1.38 million cost. Okay? The second scenario, and now just because I know the question is going to come up, well, what about the high school? And I'll get to the high school because that's another ongoing cost that we have to assume. So this one just focuses on Smith in Gideon. And then I will add in the costs on the next slide of the high school ongoing as well.
Okay.
Brian, the previous slide you had, shouldn't those numbers on the bottom, the one, the totals, shouldn't that be like on the next slide?
Yeah.
Like the status quo tech replacement 1.6 and change, you've got 1.3 and change on the next slide?
Yeah.
Scenario 1,
The status quo.
computer replacement without the one-to-one iPads, isn't scenario 1, isn't that the right column on the previous slide?
That is 3 and
The sum of those two.
Well,
is less
what-
than-
This
What-
is less, this should
right.
be 1.6,
What this one
right?
right here is, if you see iPads grade 9, $256,000.
Yeah.
That's why that's
Ah.
that's putting that up there.
That would be why.
Okay.
Okay, so,
account
good,
for that.
good.
I am going to
Okay.
account for that, so.
Good,
This,
thank you.
again, this was a snapshot of next year. Everything, Gideon, Wells, and the high school.
Now you're going to jump to a 4-year.
Now I'm going to jump out, to a four-year
Okay, thank
expense, okay? So, again, jumping out to 4 years, again, the focus here, Smith and Gideon, I have not put in the high school yet. So if we take a look at the hardware at Smith and Gideon, again, it comes out to about $1.38 million just to swap everything out. Scenario 2, this is assuming that we are going to replace some of the computers that we need to still do, and we're going to move the iPads down to Smith Middle School and a small sprinkling at Gideon Wells. We have no intention right now of moving a Gideon Wells one-to-one. This would be maybe a couple of iPad carts for each team that they could use, similar to what's going on at
Sounds like what
the
we heard about
elementary
2
level.
years ago.
I know. Today we have no intention.
Yeah, yeah. Brian, Brian, a lot of us were born at night. Okay. It just wasn't last night.
So, in any event, I feel like a comedian with hecklers up here. In any event, if we take a look at scenario number 2, again, scenario number 2, moving the iPads down to Smith Middle School, excluding the cost of the high school iPads at this point, assuming a 3-year fair market lease. In 15-16, you see the cost there, $644 and $371. That cost includes both the hardware as well as the cost of leasing iPads in that year. So that is a combination of hardware and the lease. Then we go out the next 3 years to show the ongoing costs that would be associated with that. Smith Middle School, we would be looking at in 16-17, continuing that lease at a cost of $108,000. 17-18, it would be $100,000. 18-19, about $99,000, pushing the lease forward for a total of about $951,000 over those 4 years. Yes.
Brian, if I guess, the reason that you've used 4 years is because we're now on a 5-year replacement schedule, so that's why that's a legitimate number for a cycle. Okay.
So we would, so again, this is 4 years, so over the replacement cycle at Smith Middle School, assuming a 3-year fair market lease, $951,000. Getting down to Gideon Wells, again, the hardware, a couple of iPads, for carts for each one of the cores. So you can look at, we're thinking about $16,000 per year for that. So to do a computer replacement with iPads at Smith over a 4-year period would be about $1.370 million. Some savings there. Not significant, but certainly there is some savings there over a 4-year period. I think that when we take a look now at the high school, because we haven't yet thrown in the high school numbers yet. So if we take a summary snapshot here of the high school, the left-hand side, obviously iPads only at the high school, status quo. You have your hardware costs for Smith and for Gideon. We're estimating that over 4 years, it would cost to purchase iPads about $250,000 per year. So over that 4-year period, that would be a $1 million investment. So when you add all of that up over a 4-year period, you're coming out at about $2.38 million.
So the first one is the hardware costs For Smith
Yep.
and Gideon.
Yeah, there's no iPads.
And just the iPad cost at the high school.
Correct. Because we would be making a purchase every single year that would cost us about $250,000, spread out over 4 years, is about $1 million.
So, okay, so if you go back one slide, it looks like we can lease 1,000 iPads and cost no more money than the status quo in this situation. To me, that's a wash, $11,000 at that number.
Correct.
I mean, there's no cost.
Correct.
Yet, you go to the next one, and suddenly, leasing now, or something changed, that by adding in the high school, we've jumped up, it costs us 400 grand. And I'm trying to understand now, why did the cost jump so much?
Okay.
The top two lines on each side are the same as
Yep.
the
What,
ones on the previous slide. Now you're just adding in the.
Right.
Cost of iPads at the high school.
Yeah, the Smith numbers and the Gideon numbers are the same numbers from the previous slide, just
Right.
carried forward.
so leasing is gonna save us $400,000?
Yeah, over a 4 year.
the high school.
Over a 4-year period. And Smith.
But
'cause
we, over a 4-year period.
over a 4-year period.
But we can't get 4-year leases, correct?
No, but this is based upon a 3-year lease,
Rolling.
and I just, I just keep
all right.
renewing it and took all the amounts on the renewal.
So they're leasing for far less than, well, a lot of
Yeah.
leasing, there's a buy-in in the beginning, and they slam you at the back end. People don't lease and not make money at it. Now, I don't know how they're doing it, and that's not my concern, as long as that's the number.
Well, I think
But-
that Apple is making money on the back end when when we return the iPads to them, that they're going to repurpose them and resell them. I would assume that. I don't know their business model, but certainly Apple's not in the business of losing money.
These last two slides, thank you very much. It kind of explains to me
Yeah, it helps.
what I needed to understand.
Yeah,
I think it was said, I just want to hear it again. Expansion equals less cost.
that's what the numbers are showing us.
Thank you.
Can we get those
Yeah,
two,
that's what I
can,
was
can we have those two sheets sent to our packet, or
Absolutely.
or some way? Thank you.
And Brian, this, when you've got iPads at GHS only, that $1 million, that's purchasing,
Correct.
right? So the right side is leasing, the left side is purchase. You might want
Can
to
we, yeah, we should
flag
include
that. I mean, the left side is essentially a status quo,
Right.
GHS iPads,
With
and
lease.
the replacement of the technology, the way we've been doing it at Smith and Gideon Wells.
Correct.
The right side is changing how we're purchasing the iPads at the GHS, going to lease, and going to iPads at Smith and Gideon Wells.
Correct.
It's all very clear, but I just say,
Absolutely.
put those little notations in there when we get the actual thing, so we remember what we saw. And so other people can know what we saw.
Yeah. Good night.
This is gonna be just like math class.
See?
I'm gonna walk
A
out of
good
here and think I
teacher.
got it. I'm gonna
A
get
good
out there and go, I don't have any idea what we just did.
A good teacher stops, assesses his class, adjusts his instruction.
If you give me the test in 3 days, I'm gonna fail. Because it makes perfect sense now.
Makes a lot of sense.
So, I think that's,
Brian, can you go back 2
Sure.
slides? I
This
want
one?
to see for Gideon Wells, if you just do status quo in the subsequent years, you have the $16,000 is just for,
well, that's not status quo.
Or-
In scenario number 2,
Gideon.
scenario number 2 is
It's Gideon,
bringing
Gideon,
iPads down,
16, yeah, Gideon.
right,
It's
down to Smith. But we'd also like to put some iPads in at Gideon, certainly not in a one-to-one capacity, but more in kind of a cart or two for a team, and we'd like to throw them into the lease as well.
Oh, okay, all right, so it's, this little ladybug type things that they currently are
Exactly.
using.
It's like a laptop cart, you wheel in a cart of 20, you hand them out to your class today. We're going to be working on the iPads, a full class set.
Okay, all right, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
On ours, we just had the iOS 8 point whatever update, and mine's cranky about it. How is the ones at the high school handling, which I'm sure they're using way more powerful apps than I
I haven't
am.
heard any major major issues, but I don't know if everyone has
done
updated as well.
Yeah, my
There are-
internet will just
There are some issues.
crash.
Yeah, there are some issues that some of the apps, and it's more with the developers of the apps
Okay.
than it is with Apple. Apple doesn't really make apps, it lets other people make
Sure,
them.
I'm just, some of the more well-known apps I have are crashing.
Yeah.
And I also had to delete apps to get it because I didn't have enough memory.
Memory is the
which was
big
other-
problem. It's a hog, this one.
Okay.
This one's a big one, yeah.
Brian, thank you. Have you seen a difference in iPad usage in terms of taking care of them? For the older kids who are given the iPad at the beginning of the year and it's theirs, as opposed to the ones that are on the carts and are being used as on an as-needed basis? How are they being treated well?
We have protective cases on them, which certainly helps.
You can break through protective cases.
You can, but what we've noticed is that since we've introduced I've said, I've made a decision, whoever buys an iPad must also buy a protective case. It just makes good sound, let's protect our investment. We didn't make that mandate at the beginning, and we saw, quite a bit of breakage.
Yeah, I bet.
Since we've mandated that, we haven't seen nearly as much breakage. And quite honestly, I was last week I was over at the high school because we bought all of the protective covers for this year's incoming freshman class, and I went to say, okay, what's the stats, on break and everything? Zero as far as the high school kids this year. So I think it was a sound decision. So going forward, we're going to, whenever we purchase an iPad, we think it's a good $20 investment to protect our initial investment.
Okay, thanks.
I'm all set unless you have any
Well,
other
I think
questions.
we want to thank you because